Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I welcome you once again on this Wednesday evening right here on Salam Media. Our listeners, our viewers on the various platforms of Salam Media. Wonderful that you are able to join us. It is Wednesday nights with myself, Inayat Wadi, where we unpack and we unravel global and local issues. And the one global issue, in fact, two that we are talking about this evening is later on at around 8, we will be talking about Jenin and the assault on Jenin that is taking place as we speak. But we also want to take a look at what is taking place in France, unraveling the French unrest, understanding what are some of the root causes behind these ongoing riots that are taking place. And we have assembled a panel and right out of France this evening to unpack and to unravel what we are going to be talking about this evening. And tonight we have got Monia Bouguerra, who is an international relations, or who is with the international relations of the Union of French Muslim Democrats. We've got Clotilde Bigot, who is a freelance journalist out in France, and someone who I have had the pleasure of interacting with, and he's going to be available on the telephone. We've got Daryl Bradford Smith, American alternative media personality who is based in France. So I see my guests coming on screen right now. I do see Monia Bouguerra. Monia, assalamu alaikum and welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and also Clotilde Bigot, assalamu alaikum to you and welcome.
Alaikum salam. Thank you for having me too.
Okay, I just need to check if Daryl Bradford Smith can hear me. He is on audio. Daryl, good evening to you.
Yeah. Wonderful to hear you, Inayat. It's been a long time.
Well, it certainly has been, but I'm glad that you are able to join us for the discussion. Now, I just want to obviously start off with Monia and trying to just unpack and to unravel some of the recent developments with regard to the rioting and the unrest that is unfolding in France. And just to start off or to give us a brief overview on your thoughts on the unrest, some of the reasons, some of the causes, and how have you seen this unfolding until now, Monia?
Well, in my opinion, France is only paying for the bill. You know, it's our colonial past, and France is still haunted by it's the legacy of the colonial past of our country. French citizens, we were born in France and raised here. We are being treated differently. We are considered by the majority of our fellow citizens as second-class citizens. And what's happening now? I mean, the riots, and it's just the consequence of the way our neighborhoods, our suburbs, our banlieue are being neglected, and also it's also a consequence of how we are treated every day in the media and by politicians. So it's just a unfortunately, we feel very sorry. The violence is impressive, and sometimes we are really worried. But it was inevitable, actually.
Yes, and also just to bring Clotilde and just to get your thoughts initially, just by way of an introduction.
I'm going to hop on the question, but I think there's been a slight hiccup with the connection. But I 100% agree with Monia. It's that now I think that France is indeed paying the price, because we have this kind of ghettoization of the suburbs in France, where we basically packed all these former immigrants and we just put them all together, and then we neglected those same areas. And so now we have second, third generation. We have these youngsters, these Gen Z, who are fully French, who are born and raised in France, but who were always considered as different and were kind of pushed back. And I think that the violence we've seen is just kind of the anger that's been blowing out and that's been piling up for all these years.
Yes, and clearly this was a powder keg, Daryl, to bring you into the discussion. And at some point in time, we knew this was going to explode. You and I have had many a discussion looking at France, looking at French politics, looking at French society, and looking at how the situation has evolved over a period of time, Daryl. And I know, Daryl, you've got your thoughts from a political perspective as well. And that is something that we are going to be unpacking, looking at it from a political perspective as well. But just looking at it, Clotilde speaks about the ghettoization, and Monia obviously has expressed similar sentiments with regards to what is actually playing out. And this whole question surrounding the colonial past that Monia speaks about, and also the ghettoization, just your thoughts and looking at France and looking at this colonial past, and has this actually come to haunt the country?
Well, there are a lot of things about what the two guests have said that are absolutely accurate. There is a severe problem in the neighborhoods of many of these large cities in France that have almost intentionally been built in a way that is not social. In other words, they're stacked up in large, huge, very unrelaxed environments with very few options for the young people. There are poor schools in the area compared to the rest of France, and it's sad that the access to French society has been limited in the way it has. But this is by design. It was actually put in place by Valéry Giscard d'Estaing back in 1970s when he brought in large numbers of Algerians to work for cheap labor. And now that labor pool is not needed, and he's got a huge population without a lot of jobs, including for French people at the moment. And it's blowing up in the faces of many of the European countries as well, because there's just not enough work. And over the last year and a half, 2 years, they've actually allowed another 1,200,000 people to emigrate into France and made the situation worse. So things have gone from bad to worse, and this is part of a plan by the World Economic Forum, if you know anything about what their plan is, to bring down most of the Western societies into a state of mayhem. And they're starting off with France and the United States, and both countries are experiencing similar events.
Yes, Monia, the question to you is, looking at obviously the colonial past and looking at France and looking at its involvement in Africa in particular, and Daryl spoke about Algeria, but we know that there are people from all walks of life, from all over Africa that are in France. And as you mentioned, that you are born in France, there are many, the young people are French citizens. But the fact of the matter is they are saying, for the politicians, we are absolutely nothing. And this is about young people who look at a future. And at this point in time, the situation is totally hopeless, to the extent that, we've seen what these ghettos are like. Daryl spoke about schooling just as an example, but I'm sure that there are many other social ills. There are many other social problems as a result of the situation that that these people actually find themselves in, and also looking at just purely their living conditions alone.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are lots of issues. We suffer from discrimination when we look for a job, or there's poverty in those neighborhoods, and we are being excluded from the society. When you're a Muslim woman and you wear the hijab, it's very complicated to go to university, to go to school, to get a job, and in every aspect of our lives. Being from African descent is complicated. There was a study on human rights that concluded that young men who are perceived as Black or Arabs are 20 times more likely to be stopped by the police. So there is a real issue. There is a problem of systematic racism in the police. the way the policemen are recruited, just like the way teachers are recruited, is absolutely outrageous. They are hired in a few days, formed in a few weeks, and then they're on the streets with guns. And I mean, when you know that 70% of the policemen vote for far-right parties, have far-right ideologies, and share this ideology of far-right that they call the Great Replacement and stuff like that, that is very, very, how shall I say, uh, it's insane. I mean, if you give guns to people who are racist, and there is impunity when they kill our kids on the streets, because they are not always recorded on camera. We don't always have videos to prove that they killed with impunity, that they were not in a situation of danger. It creates a feeling of injustice, and hence this anger is expressed, because those children in the suburbs don't feel they are not being respected, they're not being considered, they're not being listened to. So that's the way they express their anger. And this divide and rule policy is getting worse. France is broken now. It's like there are two camps, and we can no longer talk. You know, there was a money was raised for the killer. Almost 2 million euros were raised in 5 days, which is outrageous. You know, we feel helpless in France. You know, we don't know how to deal with that situation, which is getting worse and worse.
Well, you know, it is clear from what you are saying, Monia, that you are helpless in a situation, and the fact that I've read about the 2 million euros that have been raised within no time, which actually speaks volumes. But also, Clotilde, looking at what people are saying, I mean, some of them are actually saying it's living in a bin. It's not safe. People defecate in lifts, on stairwells. For politicians, we are nothing. We are really nothing. We don't have the same rights. Politicians go on media saying that there is no second-class citizens, but it's true. It's not true in reality. Now, for us living in South Africa, we know what it means to be second and third-class citizens. We've lived through it. We've lived through the apartheid era, and especially in this day and age, when there is just so much talk about racism. And, you know, as Monia mentioned, she spoke about the hijab. And now the question is this, you know, just about the anti-Islamic sentiment that is coming through from the right-wing political class, French society in general, but is this just purely racism that we are talking about?
I think it's a bit of both. I believe personally that there has been this this Islam, what we call in France, Islamophobia, but it's just an anti-Islam sentiment. I feel that has been growing for the past, I'm guessing, 20 to 30 years, and basically it's been fueled by the right wing, by the far right, who is pushing for more and more Islamophobia and just for more racism. And in opposite to that, we also have basically these communities coming together and saying like, hey, this is not okay. So we have now two separate blocks. We have the left and the right, and now people don't listen to each other anymore. This is a major problem in France, is that you cannot talk to your opponent, your political opponent. It's very hard to have a rational conversation. We can even add in all what happened with COVID and with all the vaccines and all these kind of conspiracy theories that came up, and that made the right wing even more far right, and all of these things that have basically been adding up for the past 20 years just pushes French people to basically take sides and being like, you know what, I'm on this side and I believe this, and I will not have a conversation with you even because you think differently. And so this is what we see. Plus, we have, especially Monia was talking about the systemic racism in the police force in France. I think this is crucial because we have policemen in France who are not well formed, who literally go on the streets after a few weeks with a gun, and who are racist. and who just want to get back at certain parts of the society. And this deepens basically the canyon in between these two groups, where you have a certain part of the French population that doesn't feel afraid of the police, that feels like if they see a policeman, if they have an issue, they can go towards the police and they're not afraid that anything will happen to them. And then you have this other part of the population that's saying, I can't even call the police, because if I call the police, I might get killed. And so these are very important factors to just take into consideration.
Yeah, definitely, Clotilde. And also, Daryl, to bring you back into the discussion, you and I have had many a discussion in the past, and I know, Daryl, you've predicted a lot that has actually come to fruition, that is proven to be true. And also, I recall you and I having this discussion on France and the increase in right-wing sentiment, the right-wing governments, one being more right than the other. And this has been a trend for a number of years. It's been a trend for a number of elections that have been hosted in France. So the key issue here is looking at French society in general. Looking at French society in general in terms of how they see their government, how they see the situation that has evolved. And at the end of the day, it is to the detriment of the people we are talking about. We are talking about those that are considered second and third class citizens in France, Daryl.
Well, the truth is that this is not only France's issue. The Italians and the Spanish and the British and the Germans all have Islamic populations that were imported. For Germany, it was the Turks. Britain, it was Pakistan. For Spain, it's Moroccans. And for French, it's mostly Algerians. And the truth is that intentionally, back in the 1970s, it was designed to bring large numbers of people from North Africa into Europe and ghettoize them, which they've done in each country. And now the same problems are erupting in all the countries in Europe. And if you take a look at Sweden particularly, that country is almost dissolved from the violence that's happened because of they brought in a large population from North Africa. So why am I saying that? Because it was by design. And when you design something to fail so miserably, you're going to get horrible results. And what they've done is intentionally make the world a very difficult place to exist in for the French public has lost almost all its economy. A lot of the French public live in next to poverty, and especially the people they've brought in from North Africa. There's a 40% poverty rate in some of the areas that the young ladies were talking about. So what we see here is an intentional dissolving of the European nation states into an anarchy, if you will. And if you take a look at who's behind Mr. Macron, it's the same person that's behind Mr. Schultz in Germany. It's the same person that was behind Boris Johnson in England. And you look throughout the different leaderships of Europe, and each one of them was controlled by this large group in Davos. They're multi-billionaires, very powerful people. And they have an idea of a global government, and they had to dissolve the nation states. And the way they're going to do it is with anarchy. And they brought in these populations and have used them to their own design. And making people suffer is part of their plan. And what they're doing now is absolutely destroying almost every country in Europe, including, any country that has participated in this, which is all European countries, including Holland and Belgium. And so, but the Americans are doing something quite similar. So this is global. And they're doing it in Australia as well. So when you take a look at the world, you're finding out that immigrant populations were brought in over the last 3-4 decades and then intentionally ghettoized and then brought up to be very angry at what's happening to their environment. And I don't see any of this being a surprise. And we talked about this taking place 15 years ago in conversation, Anaya.
Well, it certainly did, Daryl. And Monia, just looking at your situation, looking at your position, being with the international relations of the Union of French Muslim Democrats, and looking at, I'm sure that this is not an issue that you or your organization have not raised in the past. And I'm sure these are issues that have been raised over and over again. And just to look at your position, the organization, in terms of where you find yourself in terms of representations that have been made, in terms of highlighting the issues, highlighting the problems that people are actually faced with. What sort of response and what sort of issues have you actually brought up, and with whom?
Well, facing these riots, we were at first we understood the way that these young people reacted because we understand their anger. But then we asked them to calm down and to. My party is a solution. I mean, France is in denial. France is not colorblind. How come most of the victims killed by policemen are from African descent? So my party, the Union of French Muslim Democrats, is a secular party. It's not a religious party as people think. It's just that we fight Islamophobia. So we offer democratic solution to those inhabitants in the suburbs. Instead of burning down schools, shops, and buildings, we encourage these inhabitants who are crammed in the suburbs, to vote for a party that will defend their rights to believe and practice their religion. We believe in a peaceful solution. We believe in communication, and hopefully we will organize politically, because we believe that that's the only way out, actually.
Yes, and also just to ask Clotilde, looking at it from your perspective as a freelance journalist. Now, we all know the power of the media, and just looking at French media in particular, how are they looking at these riots? How are they reporting? Looking at French society in general, what are they being exposed to from a media perspective? And if you could just give us some sort of an overview in terms of media, because the media is powerful and media influence, particularly at a critical time like this.
Well, the media's influence in a time like this is extremely important. And in France, we have different kinds of medias, if I can say. We have a very right-wing medias with one TV channel called CNews, where it's basically all about the kind of the trash, like we're talking live, nonstop, pointing fingers. And this actually, the head of that media is Mr. Bouguerra, and he is trying to take over other media groups. So he's already taken over radio that has shifted their editorial line a bit more to the right, and now he wants to. Well, he took control of a newspaper, and the newspaper is actually on strike right now because he wants to change the head of the newspaper, and that is with a very famous journalist who is very right-wing. So we have that type of media. And then we have the more neutral, but still kind of right-wing, which is more, we're talking about nonstop news, where people are just basically fed these news, basically nonstop. So it kind of feels like this is the only thing that's happening right now, when it's not. Like, you can walk around Paris and be completely safe. And then thirdly, we have the public TV stations, radios, who have a very clear editorial line. And so it's much less biased and much more that they see things with a step back. And so I think that these are like the TV stations, the radio stations that are the most close to reality, because they have time to take a step back, and it's not just talking and talking for 2 hours straight about what's happening. And so it just gets into a whirlwind of bad news and goes from bad to worse, etc. But the media right now is taking huge part in how French people see France, see their own country, because we really have some very strong right-wing media. We're talking about, it's the equivalent of Fox News in the US. We have that in France, and more people watch it. So this is also very dangerous because it feeds into the whole anti-Islam, racism, all that, all these things that we were talking about. This also contributes.
Thank you for that, Clotilde. And also looking at Daryl and Daryl looking at France, and France claims to be a democracy. We've even seen comments in the aftermath of the unrest and the riots that have been taking place, talking about French democracy being attacked as a result of the unrest. And just your thoughts, because if France is a democracy, we should not be having first class and second class and third class citizens, the ghettoization that we speak about, the inequality within the French society, in fact, the social fabric of the society, of French society, actually being torn apart just by sheer inequality that exists in each and every way. Daryl? I think for some reason we have lost Daryl. Perhaps, Monia, you'd like to possibly address it, just looking at it, at France priding itself as a democracy in terms of liberties, in terms of freedoms, and the inequality just all around. Now, what does it actually speak for a country that boasts to be a democracy?
What is left in a democracy where you can no longer practice your religion, enjoy your, well, be who you want to be freely? I mean, you cannot study freely in France when you want to wear the hijab. Students are being harassed at school because of their dresses. They're considered the Islamic dresses. They just bought them from regular shops like H&M or Zara. So just because these girls are Muslims and they know they wear the hijab outside school since 2004, they no longer can wear the hijab at school. Now they are being targeted by the institutions because of the way they dress. Just a simple dress is considered as a sign showing their religion. So, I mean, what can we really call that a democracy when you can no longer wear the clothes that you want to wear? Justice as well. We are facing a system where we are not being judged the same way as other citizens. You know, one of the firemen who intervened after Nile died was almost charged for prison. He faced a sentence of 6 months in prison, while a French humorist called Pierre Palmade killed someone. He used drugs and he killed the baby in the woman's womb. He is free. He is a free man. I mean, there's justice. We can clearly see that there's a different treatment between African descent immigrants. I mean, French citizens with African descent and white French citizens. This is totally, I mean, it doesn't make sense when you know that France is the country that ratified the Declaration of Human Rights. It's written in our constitution that all men are equal, but actually in 2023, it's still not the case.
Well, it is a major issue at this point in time, and I see Daryl Bradford Smith is back with us. And Daryl, in fact, I was just asked Monia just to expand on an issue that I'd raised with regard to France and France boasting as a democracy. But for a very, very long time, we've seen the actions both on the part of the French government. We've seen French society in general in terms of how they react to the minorities in the country. And we can't be calling them a minority because when one looks at the Muslim population of France, it is the largest population in Europe. France boasts the largest Muslim population in Europe, so they make up quite a sizable portion of French society. And just looking at it from a democratic or democracy perspective, and looking at the inequalities after all these years in 2023 that Monia is referring to, about all these inequalities that still exist, and there seems to be no intent on the part of the French government to do something to address these inequalities.
Well, I agree that the problems that they're facing on a social level are actually insurmountable at the moment. Certainly after this close down of the society with this illness, this fake illness that went on, and all of the things that have happened, they made the economy that was already shaking a disaster. And French economy is in terrible shape, and so is all of the European countries. They're all in dire straits, and financially they're not able to even support their future. And right now, all of the political parties are being financed by the money in the back of these parties coming from the same source. They control the left and the right, and most people don't realize that when you get into a political argument with somebody, both sides of that argument are being financed in the dark by the same people. So when you'll notice that every time you elect somebody to change things, they don't end up changing anything. This happens in every country in Europe and every country in America. It's Canada or in Australia or in anywhere that this juggernaut of crime exists. And so you pick another party, but it seems like everybody's going to go to war in Iraq. I mean, everybody's going to go to war in Ukraine. Everybody's going to go to war. What I'm trying to explain to you is that is a uniparty. And it seems on the surface that they are at odds with each other politically at home. But the fact is, they make the same decisions with each. And this has been going on for a very long time. And money from private hands has swamped political institutions in all of the world. And much of what we think we have as freedoms are only there because they haven't taken them yet. And they're certainly on the way out. They're limiting free speech. That's one of the things that Macron did immediately. Now, social media can't share conversations about what's going on, and so freedom of speech is out the window. But he's been stopping freedom of speech now for a number of years and making it worse. But this is true also in Britain. It's true in Spain. It's true in Portugal. It's happening across Europe and the Western world. So when you take a look at the larger issues here, you find out that big money is behind much of the control that's happening. And as things worsen, there is going to be even more resistance coming from the public. And the public is going to get met with violence by the authorities. And it's going to happen to both French and immigrant populations, as well as people who are living in the suburbs, because it's just heading in that direction for all of us. When everything goes down the tubes as far as finances are concerned, and that's going to happen within the next 6 to 18 months, and it's happening now in real time. Financial systems are failing. As that happens, things are going to become violent in the streets, and everyone's going to be there fighting. That's really what is going to happen. And one of the things I wanted to point out about one of the young ladies had spoken about, last year, 7 people were shot by police in France. 7. That's not a lot of people shot, considering every single policeman has a gun. If you pair that with the country I come from, the police shot 1,300 people. And France is only 1/4 of the size of America, so 7 times 4 is not 1,300. The point of the matter is that the violence that's happening around the world is not quite as bad as it seems by the media. And I have to say that when you go into these neighborhoods, if there's a fire in some of these areas, they don't let some of these security forces or even the pompiers to come into these suburbs. This is just made things worse because the lines have been drawn between these two communities, and it doesn't seem like we're going to come together. But if we're going to stop what they have planned for our societies, we need to come together as a group and face them as one. And that means everyone. That means the suburbs and the cities and the French and the immigrant population and the people, second and third generation. Everyone here has to come together. We're all going down in flames, and that's where I see things happening, and it's happening in real time.
Yes, and also just to bring Clotilde back into the discussion, we know what had taken place in the United States of America. We know George Floyd and the whole issue surrounding Black Lives Matter that went viral right across the entire world, and it became a major international issue. The question is, will the fatal shooting of this teenager, the 17-year-old teenager, become a moment for France? Will it be a George Floyd moment for France right across the entire world, where somebody would say Algerian lives matter or Moroccan lives matter? You know, will that actually happen? How will the world actually react to what is taking place in France, the brutality and with which this 17-year-old boy was killed?
Yes,
well, just to come...
yes, and the violence is going to expand. And here's the situation that's happening right now with weapons too. They've been importing these weapons from the war in that the Americans and the Europeans have started with the Russians, and so they were using automatic weapons in the streets. This is being supported in the background by big money. This was not completely spontaneous. There were people running around with black masks and black suits on, and they had all of this stuff ready to go to have this major riot. This was not organic, all of it. Many of the people that showed up, it was organic, but many of them weren't. And it's the same in the United States. Black Lives Matter was not an organic organization. It was financed by people. And I think a lot of the violence in France is being financed as well. And that's really frightening.
Could I hop on the conversation? Yeah, I don't agree at all. I do think that we judging riots or a movement by being organic or not organic when we don't have proof is something very dangerous. And these protests are organic. It's just that in France we know we had like the Black Blocs, which are a certain part of an anarchist movement, who have been going around in the protests and who are very organized. So basically the youth knows how to organize themselves. And these automatic weapons were around much before the war in Ukraine. And it's just easy to get a gun nowadays because it's as easy to get cocaine from South America than it is to get a gun. It's just that the world is now a small village, and commerce is just basically going around very easily nowadays. But I don't think that this will be a George Floyd moment because, well, as Daryl said, we had 7 deaths. I don't know if that number is correct, but I do trust Daryl, which in France is huge because we don't have the Second Amendment of the American Constitution. We are not allowed to bear arms. And every death is extremely tragic. I'm not saying that a life is worth less in the US, obviously not. It's just that we're much less used to gun violence. We don't have shootings, and these things are much more violent for us. And every time somebody dies, for example, in Marseille, in the south of France, and it's just between rival gangs, this is a huge subject because this is something that we don't understand. This is something, as Monia, back me up, but like I personally, as a French person, I do not understand why anybody would be willing to bear arms and why you need a gun to protect yourself. Like, these are very different cultural aspects that we have.
Yes, and also Monia, looking at the age that we are in the age of social media. And we've seen Macron obviously trying or threatening to cut off social media. And that came under severe criticism from right across the board, and looking at such drastic measures, because the key issue here is to address the problems that people are faced, and not to address social media as being one of the problems. And this is where the entire issue is actually seems to be playing out, that one cannot blame young people, one cannot blame social media, Snapchat, TikTok, for organizing and encouraging rioting and violence, where it is your very own government for years and years and years have failed miserably to do something about people and their plight and their conditions.
Well, all our freedoms, all our liberties are jeopardized. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion. There are so many bills are being passed, like the Loi contre le séparatisme, to prevent associations, organizations, even citizens to express themselves. France is supposed to be the country of human rights, and there are more and more repressive, oppressive, restricting laws, which is very dangerous, because what's happening in France will end up happening around the world. And in the Western world, we're supposed to be a model, an example of democracy. And if we in France, we cannot express ourselves on the social media, sometimes French people are arrogant. They pretend to give lessons, to teach the rest of the world how to be a good country, a democratic country. And sometimes French people make fun of Americans or Chinese people because they are not totally, they're so-called, not so free as they pretend to be. But our freedoms are also lessening, and this is very, very worrying.
Yeah, it's by design. And the lessening of the freedoms is certainly by design, and we are heading toward a Chinese model of social control, and that's part of their plan. And the French model of freedom is being stolen, and that's, of course, it already has spread beyond France, the violence. It's happening in Belgium, it's happening in Switzerland, it's happening in northern Italy, and it will spread. And it's going to spread because they're taking away the financial system, which is going to be electronic soon. As soon as that electronic money comes out, if you say something against them from Islam and say that you don't agree with the government, they're going to shut your money off. And you won't have cash to spend anymore because they're going to go to a digital system of financing your life. This is a total control, and people don't understand that there's a larger game being played here against society, and it's not. They're using this problem of poverty in the suburbs to create the excuses to take away human freedoms, and it's going to happen in every country in Europe. It already is, and it's already happening across the world. They want to take our freedoms, and they want us to be in social credit system like in China. And that's where the system is heading. And they have this written down. If you take a look at Rockefeller's plan for the world in 2010, he wrote this all out in a paper called Lockstep. And he designed this whole thing to come to fruition. They have designed this. It's in writing. You can read the documents. And they are following their plan. And it's happening right out of Davos. And France is one of the countries that's being led to this slaughter because Macron is right out of their pocket. He's part of the World Economic Forum. He's one of their main political children. They have designed him. They have put him in office. He used to work for the Rothschild banking structure, and this is exactly what's happening. We're heading toward a world government, and it's going to resemble Chinese control of everything. And if you don't see that coming, you're not going to be able to fight the real fight, and that's the freedom for everybody, everywhere.
Yes, and also just to bring Clotilde back, just your thoughts on Emmanuel Macron and his ability to deal with the problem, because we have learned that he's now meeting with officials, trying to explore and understand the deeper reasons that has actually plunged the country into riots. There was a meeting with 220 mayors that take place. Now, I mean, is this the time? Is this the time for Macron and for him to still try and explore or gain an understanding as to why his country has been plunged into this crisis?
Well, I do think that it's kind of a better late than never situation, although it is far too late. But yeah, he's met with the mayors, with all of the mayors of the cities that in which there was some violence. And the one thing that he did not do, the two people that he did not meet, is Nael's parents. As far as I know, he did not meet them. And I think that this is something where there was a lot of resentment, and it's just a simple gesture. It's just we're talking about something, just a gesture, and he didn't do that. So I think that that's problematic. After, can Macron deal with the situation and first of all help tone down the unrest and then make France a better country for all its citizens? I think it's a very long-term plan. And I do believe that if Macron starts now, maybe in 10, 15 years, we'll have a more equalitarian society. But that doesn't come with overnight reforms. It comes with very, very deep reforms. It comes with the police institution. We need to really change that from top to bottom. And it comes with just getting better infrastructures for these neighborhoods, better schooling, getting teachers to actually teach in these schools, allowing these students to actually go to the best schools, even if it's a bit further from their house. But that also means better transport systems. So it's just a lot of things that need to be done. And these things take a lot of time. They should have been done to begin with.
Definitely. But also just to ask Monia to come in and looking at French society in general. Now, we've seen reports, we've seen polls that have been conducted where 41% of French citizens or French people blame the migrants for the troubles. And there are very few that actually lay the blame on the part of politicians, where although some are actually saying that, Macron's ratings have actually dropped, and he's opened the door for Marine Le Pen to come into power. But the key issue is when one looks and reads into the numbers, looks into the polls that are being conducted, and again, when you see the blame game that is being played, blame games that is actually played on the migrants themselves, whereas they have been the victim for a very, very long time.
Yes, they always blame immigrants and the descendants of immigrants for all the problems in France. It's always our fault. If anything happens in France, it's because of the Muslims. It's not victimization. It's real. It's facts. I mean, even the United Nations, the UN, recently asked France to seriously address the problems of racism in France. And that's why there are protests and riots right now, because we don't want to be scapegoated. We don't want to be scapegoated and to be considered as the major problem in France. We have much more serious issues in France. Immigrants are not guilty or accountable for all the problems in the country, of course. And Marine Le Pen is taking the advantage of these riots because the policemen are actually portrayed and seen as heroes right now, facing these protesters who burn, who break, who steal. And by the way, all the thieves are not from African descent. We have seen many videos showing that white French people also take advantage of the situation to steal in shops. But all they want to do is, stigmatize these populations and to fuel this hatred, this hate against basically non-white citizens. It's the divide and rule policy. We are used to that, unfortunately. And now, who will really be the winner? It's sad, but the far rights are taking advantage of the situation, by portraying these protesters as savages and barbarians,
Well, these definitely are strong words, referring them to as savages and barbarians. And Clotilde, just your thoughts on the potential of growing levels of racial tensions as a result of this unrest.
Well, I think this is something in France we talk about a lot, is that basically we're right now, these riots or this unrest is basically paving the way for the far right. And because it just gives more, it just gives more reasons for the far right to be like, hey, look, we told you so, immigrants are bad, let's preserve our culture, etc. So this is very dangerous, what's happening. And this is why in this momentum, in the kind of like when riots are toning down and we have time to think and we can reflect on what happened, this is when the real issues need to be brought up. This is when we need to talk about inequality, about the infrastructures, about everything I talked about before, about systemic racism, all these issues. This is now that we have to talk about them on a political level, because if we don't, then it's just going to stay very on the surface, where we're just going to be like, look, this youth is robbing a grocery shop. What do we do now? And so this is very interesting. And I think that we're really in that moment where politicians have to really seize that opportunity.
Well, thank you. I see we've got about 6 or 7 minutes to go. I'm going to start off and just get final thoughts. Daryl, starting with you, just some final thoughts.
Yeah, I have to say that your guests are going to be surprised by what they see happen in the world in the next 6 months. France is going to have no food in your grocery stores. There's not going to be any money in your pocket. There's not going to be any electric coming into your homes, and you're not going to be warm with your house. There's not going to be oil for your heat. And this is what's happening globally. It's not just happening in France. It's happening in Germany. It's happening in Italy. It's happening in Canada. It's happening in Australia. It's happening across the world, and it's happening now. And the fact that you haven't even brought up any of those facts, there's not going to be any food for anybody. There's not going to be anything for anybody. You're going to be fighting in the streets for breadcrumbs. And this is coming. And I told Inayat about it years ago. I told him how it would happen and the timing it would happen. And every single thing I've ever told him has happened. Everything. I've never missed once. And my background is a finance professor. I have taught about money, and I understand that this world is run by money. It's a sad fact, but what's happening right now is a disaster, and it's going to cause all kinds of horrible suffering for everybody, not just the immigrant population, not just the second and third generation population, but everyone. And so if we don't start taking a look at what's really happening globally, you're going to become a victim rather than somebody who survives it.
Thank you for that, Daryl. And we're going now. Monia, final thoughts from you?
Well, while we speak about these protesters, we no longer talk about the protest about the pension reforms that created a lot of demonstrations these days, these past weeks. As usual, it's just a way to distract the people. Anytime anything happens, it's a way to vote laws and reforms that are unpopular, just like the reforms on unemployment, or loi contre le séparatisme, separatist law, or the pension reform. As usual, some issues are used, to make us look the other way around. So I share Daryl's views on how severe the situation is, but I have to be. I strive to be optimistic, because there are still people in France, in this country, who believe in a better future, who want to change the situation. It's complicated with millionaires who buy the media, who there is a kind of indoctrination, in France, and our liberties are at stake. But we stand still. We'll keep fighting anyway. There are elections in June 2024, the European elections, so hopefully we'll make a difference. And I hope that we'll, with my party, the Union of French Muslim Democrats, we will convince people that the democratic solution is the best way to express our thoughts.
Well, thank you for that, Monia. And this finally, Clotilde, you may have the last words.
Well, I just want to give everyone a meet up in 6 months to see if France will be without electricity, but I highly doubt it. Just as somebody that lives in Lebanon, in a country where there is actually no state electricity, I always react pretty strongly, because I think that it's just disrespecting all the countries who are really struggling. And I think in France we have a lot of issues, and the riots have proven that, but we also have to see what is actually working. And I doubt that we'll run out of food, because we're a first world country, but we'll see in 6 months. And so focusing back on the riots, I do think that this is a momentum, and this is what we're seeing now. It's true what Monia was talking about. We're not talking about the pension reforms anymore. We're talking about this, and because we can only focus on one thing at a time, it's very hard to kind of dissociate and to go back on what the past months were like. But these past 6 months in France, we've seen a lot of protests for a lot of different reasons, and basically the common factor in all these reasons is Macron pushing his thoughts and basically denying democracy. He uses an article in the Constitution that's called the 49.3, where you can basically bypass the National Assembly. And this is something that he has to realize that he can't do anymore, because we're not a very docile people, and we will protest and we will set fire to a bunch of things. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but this is not something you can do with the French people. And I do think that in this momentum right now, some things seriously need to change for the French society, for us to be able to just live with each other, because right now it's getting really hard.
Well, definitely. And I think you just summed it up so well, just so that you can live together. I mean, that alone, speaks volumes. But to all our panelists, to Daryl Bradford Smith, American alternative media personality, who is based in France, to you, Monia Bouguerra, international relations of the Union of French Muslim Democrats, and also Clotilde Bigot, freelance journalist. To all of you, we thank you. We do appreciate you taking time out, being part of this panel discussion right here on Sana Media on Wednesday nights with myself, United Body. So all the best to all of you. Please take care. Yes, that brings us to the end of part one of the discussion. We're going to go for a break. We come back. We will be analyzing Israel's military operation in Jenin.